I'm Dr. Alex Sévigny. I'm a professor in the program of the McMaster Communications Management program, and we're really pleased to be here today for Julia Wilkinson's Capstone research project defense, which is the culminating moment of people's MCM experience. It's congratulations on getting this far. I look forward to your presentation. I'll just go through the rules of the road. So the way it works is you'll have about 20 to 25 minutes for your presentation. 25 minutes. Don't worry if you go over time, we won't block you. It's just, 25 minutes. After that, we will go through a round of questions led off by your supervisor, Dr. Terry Flynn, then your second reader, Professor Hoornweg, and then I may ask a question myself because I get that ability as chair. After we finish round one, we'll go through a second round of questions, and then we'll open it up to the gallery. So folks who are watching, who aren't on the examining committee, you're allowed to ask questions. This is a public defense, as are all of them, right? So do feel free to participate. And after that, we will send everybody out of the room except for the examining committee. We will meet and come back after 5 minutes or so with a verdict of complete or not complete. So without further ado, it's 9:03. That gives you until 9:28. So the floor is yours, Julia.
All right. Well, thank you, Alex, and good morning, everyone. Today, I'm really pleased to take you through my research on how public relations professionals can influence authentic corporate social advocacy and support positive organizational reputation. To speak or not to speak? When it comes to divisive social and political issues, that is the question many organizations grapple with. Now, although this practice, known as corporate social advocacy, is not new, it's become more prevalent as stakeholders increasingly pressure organizations to speak out on contentious issues. This pressure intensified in 2020 with the pandemic and protests. Progressive activists urged organizations to make public statements backed by action, and those who stayed silent faced intense criticism. But fast forward to 2023, and simply saying something wasn't so simple anymore. Sorry, can you see my right screen? Or are you seeing my notes?
No.
Okay,
nope.
Thank you. Sorry. Okay, so fast forward to 2023, simply saying something wasn't so simple anymore. In the wake of the October 7th attack on Israel, both speaking out and staying silent generated backlash. And this backlash wasn't just reserved for organizations' responses to geopolitical conflict. Several brands, including Bud Light and Target, experienced backlash to their 2023 Pride campaigns. By 2024, pressure from conservative activists prompted multiple corporations to reverse the commitments they'd made in previous years, including to diversity, equity, and inclusion. This shifting landscape, characterized by conflicting stakeholder demands, presents a challenge for organizations. At this point, both engaging and not engaging in corporate social advocacy is fraught with risk. So this capstone research sought to better understand how PR professionals can help their organizations make CSA decisions that are authentic and support organizational reputation. So I started with a comprehensive literature review focused on 3 themes. First was corporate social advocacy, or CSA. Dodd and Supa define CSA as an organization making a public statement or taking a public stance on social political issues. Although considered by some to be a form of values advocacy, an evolution of corporate social responsibility, what differentiates corporate social advocacy is that it involves controversial and divisive issues that are not directly related to the company's core business. Now, CSA can encompass both progressive and conservative issues, such as when Starbucks and Chick-fil-A spoke out in support of and against same-sex marriage, respectively. Some organizations engage in CSA proactively because they genuinely believe that societal values are at risk. Others do so to attract talent or employees. CSA, however, can also be reactive, with organizations speaking out to maintain legitimacy among their stakeholders, including their employees. But reactive CSA is risky because it may not be authentic. According to Yim, authentic CSA requires closing 2 types of gaps. factual gaps, which exist when there is a discrepancy between what an organization says and how it acts, and conformity gaps, which exist when there's a discrepancy between how an organization behaves and how society believes it should behave. My second theme was ethics. Now, to be an ethical business, organizations must be honest about where they can have a genuine impact. But this can be really challenging because, much like ethical dilemmas, discussions around CSA can lead to conflicts over whose values are right. So decision-making frameworks that bring together multiple perspectives and facilitate two-way symmetrical communication can help solve these conflicts, and PR can help drive this process. Multiple scholars have advocated for PR to serve as an ethical conscience or internal activist within an organization. Now, doing so effectively requires PR to have authority, access to the dominant coalition, and autonomy, which includes reporting directly to the CEO. Now, this combined with what I learned about CSA led me to my first proposition. When PR professionals are given the autonomy to use ethical decision-making frameworks in guiding their organization's CSA efforts, the CSA is more likely to be authentic. My third theme was reputation. So although the literature presents myriad definitions of reputation, common among them is that reputation is about stakeholders' perception of an organization, and reputation is built across multiple dimensions. Now, reputation is widely considered a valuable, intangible asset, and engaging in CSA can bolster your reputation by enhancing the perception and legitimacy of the organization among those who agree with the CSA. However, CSA can also damage reputation because it can alienate and generate backlash from stakeholders who disagree. And regardless of where stakeholders stand on a particular issue, engaging in fake stand taking, which we also call woke washing, that too can damage reputation. So given this complexity, scholars have posited that CSA is an extension of issues management and an important function of the PR practice. And this led me to my second proposition. When PR professionals have influence over their organization's CSA efforts, the CSA is more likely to have a positive impact on organizational reputation. Together, my propositions formed the following thesis. When PR professionals are given the autonomy and have the influence to use ethical decision-making frameworks in guiding their organization's CSA efforts, the CSA is more likely to be authentic and positively impact the organization's reputation. The question is, does this normative theory exist in practice? And that's what I set out to explore through 4 research questions. So my first question was, how and to what extent are PR professionals involved in their organization's CSA strategies? Second, how and to what extent do PR professionals balance the interests of multiple stakeholder groups when engaging or not engaging in CSA? Third, how and to what extent does PR's involvement in CSA impact the CSA's authenticity? And fourth, how and to what extent does PR's involvement in CSA enhance organizational reputation? So to answer these questions, I conducted mixed methods research wherein I triangulated 3 sources of data. The first was my aforementioned literature review. Second, I conducted a survey of 82 PR professionals employed at publicly traded or privately held corporations in Canada and the United States. And third, I conducted 15 long-form interviews with senior PR professionals employed at corporations in Canada and the United States. To analyze my data, starting with the survey, I conducted frequency and correlation analyses of the survey data in Microsoft Excel. I analyzed my interviews by following theoretical propositions and examining rival hypotheses. My analytical techniques included pattern matching and explanation building. And to investigate my thesis a bit further, I conducted a correlation analysis by quantifying 6 relevant interview questions through one-hot encoding. I then returned to my interview notes and the transcripts, and I looked for the existence of 2 factors. First, whether the interviewee indicated that their organization's communication was consistent with its action. And second, whether the interviewee indicated that although stakeholders and society's perspectives were considered, CSA decisions were ultimately grounded in company values, strategy, or previous actions. Now, if both these factors were present, I coded the organization as authentic as per Yim's definition. So what did I find? Well, starting with research question 1, just over half of the survey respondents and a quarter of interviewees are part of PR teams where the PR leader reports directly to the CEO. That said, they do face minimal barriers when participating in CSA decision-making, with only 12% of survey respondents reporting barriers. Interviews also face minimal barriers, but 2 themes emerged. The first was potential barriers to being at the decision-making table, which for some organizations, for some interviewees was never an issue because their organization inherently values public relations. Others indicated they had to earn that proverbial seat at the table by demonstrating their value to the dominant coalition. Now, the second was potential barriers that hinder the CSA decision-making itself, with a common sentiment being that because CSA is so emotionally charged, it can be challenging to make an objective decision. Now, given the limited barriers, it makes sense that the data also showed that PR professionals are playing a significant role in CSA decisions. Survey respondents were more likely to be involved in tactics, whereas interviewees were more likely to be involved in the decision-making. All right, research question 2 surfaced a lot of data on how PR professionals balance the interests of multiple stakeholder groups. First, they are definitely considering stakeholder perspectives, especially those of their employees. However, stakeholder views are not the sole consideration in CSA decisions. Second, the use of decision-making frameworks is inconsistent. What was actually more common is making these decisions through cross-functional discussion and debate. That said, those who use frameworks find them useful because they help move the discussion from emotional and subjective to rational and objective. Third, ethics is central to CSA decision-making, with 80% of interviewees indicating that they approach CSA through an ethical lens. They defined ethical CSA as partnering with ethical organizations to translate their CSA into action, being honest about where they can have an impact, and recognizing that just because an issue is unethical doesn't necessarily mean that staying silent on that issue is unethical. In fact, the opposite could be true, as illustrated by this quote from PR professional M. Fourth, both survey and interview respondents indicated that organizational reputation is a major factor in CSA decisions. Survey data also indicated that PR's involvement increases the consideration of reputation. This is consistent with the interview data. Interviewees emphasized assessing not only the potential reputational impact of the CSA, but also whether they had the credibility to weigh in on the issue in the first place. For research question 3, survey and interview data indicated that PR professionals strongly believe that communication should be consistent with action, even when facing stakeholder pressure to make a statement. Multiple interviewees stressed that public opinion alone should not be influencing either your communication or your action. These decisions should ultimately be grounded in company strategy and values, and that helps drive authentic CSA. And as you can see on this chart of correlations, there's a number of ways PR can support authentic CSA, namely being involved in the decision and the strategy development, and considering ethics as part of the decision-making. Okay, finally, for research question 4, only half of the survey and interview participants said that their organization's previous CSA strategies had positively impacted organizational reputation. The survey data suggested, though, that when PR is involved in the decision-making, the CSA is more likely to positively impact reputation. And that is even more true if PR reports directly to the CEO. The data also suggested that authentic CSA and considering ethics as part of your decision-making doesn't necessarily translate to positive reputation. Okay, so now let's discuss what all this means. Well, CSA presents an opportunity for autonomy, even if your reporting structures suggest otherwise. Now, the most likely explanation for this is that serving as the ethical conscience of your organization requires access to the dominant coalition, not necessarily permanent membership. And this access is granted because CSA is so divisive. As I said, numerous scholars consider it to be a form of issues management. Combine this with the theory, and probably many of our personal experiences, that PR is often only brought to the table when an issue or crisis strikes, and voila, CSA presents an opportunity to demonstrate one's value. Now, it's also worth noting that not all organizations are engaging in CSA or even having discussions about it. And it's because they're not facing any pressure to do so. Now, this reinforces Souter and Youngblood's theory that CSA is about maintaining legitimacy among your stakeholders. If stakeholders aren't questioning your legitimacy, then there's no need to engage in CSA. But this may be short-sighted, not only because of the potential proactive benefits to engaging in CSA, but more important because stakeholder pressure, just because there's no stakeholder pressure today, doesn't mean there won't be stakeholder pressure tomorrow. Okay, again, research question 2 is big, so bear with me. So there's a lot to unpack. First, multiple interviewees said that PR's role in CSA is to help their organizations understand how stakeholders may respond to the CSA or lack thereof. Now, this is consistent with the theory that as boundary spanners, PR professionals are well positioned to influence strategy and decisions as they relate to relationships with stakeholders. Now, although CSA involves making external statements, employees emerged as a critical stakeholder group when making these decisions. And that may indicate that some organizations are engaging in CSA to maintain legitimacy among their own employees. Now, this makes sense when you consider the recent rise in employee activism, shifting employee expectations of their employers, and the fact that a few years ago, employees emerged as an organization's most important stakeholder group, more so than customers, as per the Edelman Trust Barometer. All that to say, though, as important as stakeholders are, what's more important is making decisions that align with company culture and values, and that's consistent with Freidenberg et al.'s definition of authentic brand activism. All right, second, frameworks work, but only as a starting point. You'll recall that I said interviewees are more likely to engage in cross-functional discussion and debate. That said, when you insert a framework in the discussion, it allows you to take the emotion out of it, make more consistent and rational decisions. Third, as consistent with Parcha and Westerman's perspective, there was near consensus among the interviewees that ethics should underpin CSA. Now, one explanation for this is that PR professionals are serving as their organization's ethical conscience, and they're doing this by being honest about where they can have an impact and avoiding false claims. Finally, PR professionals' hyper-focus on reputation when making CSA decisions reinforces that PR professionals are reputational stewards. Now, I want to add that CSA is part of the social rational dimension of reputation, and it's harder to recover from a social reputation loss. This is perhaps why reputation is so heavily considered when making these decisions, even so far as that they're going through scenario planning to see how it may play out. Okay. Now, by ensuring that communication is consistent with action, PR professionals are closing potential factual gaps. This aligns with Lim and Young's theory of how PR managers can help organizations achieve authentic CSA, and it's consistent with Mirza et al.'s recommendation of avoiding virtue signaling. By advocating for their stakeholders, PR professionals are also addressing potential conformity gaps. Doing so effectively is what drives real societal change. Close both gaps, and you're well positioned to achieve authentic CSA. Now, although decision-making frameworks may support authentic CSA, ethics has a greater influence on CSA authenticity. And as I mentioned, when PR is involved in the decision and strategy development, the CSA is more likely to be authentic. And achieving authentic CSA is easier for PR professionals who report directly to the CEO, perhaps because by earning the CEO's trust, they can influence the dominant coalition to not only look at both these gaps, but try to address them. All right, and when PR is also there to help shape the CSA, it's more likely to support organizational reputation. Once again, supporting the theory that PR is the function that protects reputation. Again, it may be easier for PR professionals who report directly to the CEO to lead CSA that positively impacts reputation. Now, this may be because, as per Bowen's theory, this allows them to influence strategy and policy, and then that enables them to implement CSA that supports multiple dimensions of reputation. Now, all that to say, although Young found perceived authenticity to be the strongest predictor of reputation, neither authentic nor ethical CSA necessarily enhances organizational reputation. At least that's what I found in my data. So why is this? Well, first, a positive reputation can't be built through a single action or communication, no matter how authentic. It requires consistency. Second, since reputation is built across multiple dimensions, authentic and ethical CSA are but two of many factors contributing to reputation. And also remember, even if the CSA is authentic, it may still damage your reputation among those stakeholders who disagree with your stance. So when I returned to my thesis, I was on the right track, I'll give myself that, but not exactly right. What is true is that PR professionals have autonomy when it comes to CSA. When they are involved, the CSA is more likely to have a positive impact on organizational reputation and be authentic, the latter being especially true if they approach the decision through an ethical lens. And although frameworks are not the be-all end-all, they are a valuable tool in the overall decision-making process. Okay, so to help PR professionals apply these findings, I created practical recommendations in the form of a decision tree. Now, I know this is scary, so don't worry, I won't read the whole thing to you. The tree starts with the question of autonomy. It then moves to either assessing one's existing framework or developing a new framework, how to align your key decision makers, and then how to use the framework to guide your CSA discussions. So ultimately, the purpose of this tree isn't to help you decide whether or not you should engage in CSA, because the answer to that question is always going to be unique to your organization and the issue. The purpose of this is to help PR professionals develop a consistent and therefore authentic process for their organization. Now, I think this capstone surfaced several areas of future research. First, I believe my normative theory would benefit from being tested through case studies of specific organizations, because that would allow for documentation analysis, which I didn't do in order to protect my participants' anonymity. Second, a content analysis of how CSA has evolved since 2020 may reveal how the social and political trends are influencing the reputational impact of CSA. Third, how CSA plays out at different organizations and across industries is perhaps a worthwhile area of study. And finally, since employees are a driving force behind whether an organization decides to engage in CSA, further research on the relationship between employee activism and CSA is needed. Now, there were, of course, several limitations to this research. I have to note that my sample sizes were small and obtained through snowball convenience sampling, so they can't be generalized to the broader population. But of all of these, the main limitation I want to focus on is the societal rival. So while I was conducting my research, the social and political environment was shifting toward more conservative values. Case in point, Donald Trump was reelected while I was still conducting my interviews. So because my results are a function of when I gathered my data, they may no longer be relevant. That said, I actually believe my research is even more relevant now. Now, my paper includes this as an epilogue, but for the sake of time, I'll just quickly cover my three main arguments. First, it's important to remember CSA can encompass both progressive and conservative issues. Thus, when a company like Walmart or McDonald's makes a public statement that it is backtracking on its DEI initiatives, that is, in and of itself, still a form of CSA. Second, employees are a critical stakeholder group, which means when the external winds of change hit internal activism, this is going to become even more complex. And third, even if this was just a moment in time and CSA goes away, it's good to study because it may come back around again. Now, before I end, I want to thank my supervisor, Dr. Terry Flynn, for coaching me, getting me on the blocks, and cheering me on through this entire race. Thanks to my second reader and reputation inspiration, Jacquie Hoornweg, my defense chair and the data guru, Dr. Alex Sévigny, and all of the MCM professors whose lessons culminated in this capstone research. Thank you to my amazingly supportive Canadian Tire team members, both former and current, specifically Jane Shaw and my boss, Stephanie Natalin. Thank you to my MCM 16 cohort, the best team I could ever ask for, and my incredible friends, the most amazing cheerleaders I could ask for. Special thanks to Emily Van Dopp and Kevin Flother for being my guinea pig for this presentation. Thanks to my family, especially Dad, my sister Jane, my Aunt Janet and Uncle Don, and the late Grandpa George, all of whom have been incredibly supportive of this since before day one. And the biggest thanks of all to my husband, who I allowed him to have 2 edits to this. And one is that he wanted me to say that, in the words of Bette Midler, he is the wind beneath my wings. Finally, this capstone is dedicated to the memory of my mom, who, as it turns out, was on the right track when she used to tell me that you can't say the wrong thing so long as your heart is in the right place. And with that, I look forward to your questions.
Great, thank you very much, Julia, for that engaging presentation. And now we'll go on to the question period, as you mentioned. We'll start with Dr. Terry Flynn, your supervisor.
Well, congratulations, Julia. That was an excellent presentation. Under time, I think it was 1 minute 54 seconds. I think that's what it was. Congratulations. That's an inside joke for us.
Oh, I get it. Sorry. I'm still like,
she now has figured out.
Mm-hmm.
So, this is the first capstone that I think we've done in the over 200 that has an epilogue. And the epilogue is written because of that changing storm that happened in the midst of it. So you just been appointed the Chief Communication Officer for Apple. And Apple is fighting a conservative shareholder charge to get rid of the DEI stuff. And Apple has said, no, we're going to keep it. And yet at the same time, Tim Cook has given $1 million to the inauguration of Donald Trump. How is Apple authentic?
Well, that's a great question, Terry. I think that, it's important to separate those two things. I know they seem like they're conflated, right? Because I think a lot of the companies that have backed off on their DEI or other programs, they've done so, and a lot of people think they've done so to placate Trump, right? You look at Zuckerberg, I feel like it looks like they're placating Trump. But I think a lot of them are also just trying to strike a balance between their multiple stakeholder groups, right? We've made this move a while ago from shareholder capitalism to stakeholder capitalism, right? And you're trying to focus on all these different stakeholder groups, which can be very challenging. So I would say Apple, giving that donation, they have one very, very powerful stakeholder in Donald Trump. So they're, throwing him a bone because they want to play ball with him. But at the same time, they recognize other stakeholders for whom the DEI is authentic and is very important, right? So what they've done is, when you have these activist shareholders saying, we want you to get off of this, they're saying, no, we don't think that. We think this is right for our company. It's good for our business. And we're going to take it to a vote, right? And they're encouraging their shareholders to vote it down, right? Because they genuinely, at least in their messaging, they've talked about how it closes both gaps, right? It is authentic to their organization, and it would be what many of their stakeholders are calling for, right? So it's striking that balance. And I think maybe the donation to Donald Trump is a way to sort of like put him over there and keep focusing on your efforts over here. So without being inside, that would be my assumption.
Well, as the Chief Communication Officer at Apple, you're now inside. So
right. Okay.
You need to figure that out. Okay. So talk to me about the journey to this aha moment, right? In your first paper, you looked at an issue relevant to the organization that you studied. As you're sort of, I want to dig into this kind of thing. Well, how do organizations make these tough decisions about social issues as well? And then obviously you did some work with Jacquie's class, but tell me about all the courses that you've taken. How have they sort of been the building blocks to this aha moment? And when did it become, oh, wow, this kind of makes sense?
Yeah. No, I love that question. Thanks, Terry. It would definitely start with 7-Eleven, your class, and looking at whether or not public relations professionals can influence societal change. And I was specifically doing a case study focusing on Canadian Tire and it ending its relationship with Hockey Canada, right? So that really inspired me, and I saw, okay, there's opportunities here for public relations professionals. On the flip side, I'd also had experiences at work where there were certain things that we maybe wanted to speak out on, or you're seeing lots of organizations speak out on, and there's something inside you that thinks like, I don't know if this is quite right for our organization. Like maybe I feel strongly about this, but I don't know about this, but I couldn't articulate that, right? It was just a feeling, a sense. And then if it's just a feeling, how on earth do you persuade your dominant coalition? Like, oh, I have a feeling about this, right? So then I started really digging into it. And what is this? And the ethics, and what we learned in your ethics class really built on that, and understanding the deontological frameworks that you can bring into public relations, and understanding also like, who do you have a duty to? Do you focus on your duty to yourself, to your job, to your stakeholders, right? And then what really was a big aha moment was it in Dr. Alex Sévigny's data science class, when I was studying how CEOs were using LinkedIn. And I was looking at the different themes of their LinkedIn posts. And the one theme that was driving negative feedback was corporate social advocacy. And that was the first time I'd ever even heard of that term, right? So we've a lot of us have engaged in it, but we didn't know what the definition of it. So that then I connected back to that weird gut feeling I'd had like years before. I'm like, okay, so you think you're saying something good, you're going out and you're doing something good, but people are reacting badly. Like, why is this? And that is then when I started unpacking it, and then going into Jacquie's class with reputation and understanding all of the different dimensions that come into reputation, and how hard it is to control, and how it's like a sort of long tail goal. And there's all these pieces. So all of this sort of led me to reading more about corporate social advocacy, which helped me build that initial thesis, which I think was a little bit, I'm happy to say, was quite naive, because I think I was just like, if you do A and B, it will equal C, but it's not that straightforward, right? Like, as we learned in Jacquie's class, there's so much that goes into reputation. And I think I just like scratched the surface on ethics and reputation as a part of CSA. There's way more to look at.
Great, thanks. Over to you, Jacquie.
Thank you so much. So congratulations on amazing presentation, and pretty significant that you got it in under time, because having read your paper, there are so many layers to it. And, you know, I was writing questions as I was reading it, and I have like, I think over 10 questions that I could ask you on all different aspects of it. And I really, really enjoyed the paper, and I would just really encourage you to find a way to publish it, to do some more speaking about it. I think you have a lot of different, you know, obviously for the capstone, you've given us the broad, but there's a lot of different aspects of this that you could, you know, go deeper down if you wanted to continue. You might want to have a little break first, but you know, if you want to do some more research at some point. I've always admired your work, and I just want to have an observation before I go into the questions. And I think something that you do that I've really noticed is that connection between intellectual and emotional. And I think you did a really good job of that in this paper as well. That really stood out for me, as well as your willingness to go into the shades of gray. So you didn't just say, you know, this is the model where the PR function fits into, and this is the only way it can be. You looked at the different ways that PR can fit into functions and said, here's how it can still work. I thought that was really significant. It's more work, it's more writing, but it really, to me, spoke to something that you do really well that I think is important in PR, which really is that ability to tackle the shades of gray, and also the intellectual and emotional lives that we manage as public relations professionals. So just great job on that. My first question for you on the paper is you talk a lot about frameworks, and you've talked about that in the presentation as well, and the fact that a lot of organizations use frameworks, but that it's not the only thing. Can you just talk a little bit more about the value and limitations of frameworks, and some of the other pieces that you see that, you know, really came out of your study that you need to be thinking of in conjunction with, you know, the check marks of here's what the framework says we should do. How do you marry that with some of the other things that might be unique to your organization as well?
Okay, yeah, no, I'm glad you asked this. And frameworks is really interesting, because for context, I was like, a sole believer in like the framework will solve everything. Like that is one of the things I took out of ethics. And so I think starting with the first part of your question, like where are frameworks beneficial? So one of the things I saw in the data is that PR professionals who use frameworks are more likely to consider stakeholder expectations. There was a correlation there. So I think having a framework in place helps you take a step back and maybe not just say, oh, we're seeing this trending on social media. You parse it out across different stakeholder groups, right? And how are they all going to approach this? So then that helps you like think about gap number 2, right? Closing that gap about what people expect of you. But I also think that, you know, the framework and as I said, sorry, when you have a framework, you are able to walk in and say, okay, let's discuss this as terms of like, what is the right decision for our company? Not what is my personal decision as Julia, the PR person, because I think that's where these things get really, really tough. Because if you make a decision that people don't agree with and maybe isn't your personal feelings, you know, I talked to a few interviewees, one who told me that, you know, he told his organization, hey, I know you guys feel strongly about this, but this isn't the right time for us to make a statement about this. And then his employee like essentially told him he was racist. And he was just like, okay, I want to try and separate like what I think is what my personal feelings are versus what's right for the organization. So I think that's where a framework comes in handy. It protects not just the org, but also the PR professional. Limitation to the framework, however, is that if you rely too heavily on it, right? These issues are incredibly complex, they're incredibly nuanced. And so it's just one piece of your process. So I think it could be too easy to say, oh, well, we have a framework. We have a checklist for this. So like, we're good. And then if you have a framework, you may not engage in the cross-functional discussion because you just have one PR person with their checklist being like, all right, yep, ran it through the framework, we're good. So that I think is like the biggest limitation is you rely too heavily on the framework. And I'm going to say, I do not remember what the third part of your question was. So
the third part is, what are the other things that you bring in? So you've got your framework. What are some of the other things, you know, tools in your box, if you will, or principles that you're thinking about when you're thinking about what should I do as I'm tackling, you know, some of the really significant polarizing questions that we've seen public relations people have to, you know, the challenges not only of Donald Trump, certainly that, and the whole conservative movement, but also like, you know, war in Gaza and all of those things that are really hot button issues. So you've got your framework. What are those other things that you're relying on as well?
So I think one of the big things is you have to do work before the issue happens, right? And one of the best pieces of advice I got from an interviewee that is something I would want to take forward and I would recommend all PR professionals take forward is when you're educating your dominant coalition on your stakeholder perspectives, like as that boundary spanner, it can't be something you do in the moment in that meeting. And she called it like a drip approach. Like she said, she's like, because she works for like a multinational organization. She represents Canada. They're based out of the US. So she said, it's very important for me to be constantly educating them on the Canadian market and our stakeholders here. Because if I try to bring that up in the moment when we're having one of these discussions, I'm not necessarily going to be heard. I need them to already have that sort of foundation of understanding of who we're dealing with different constituents. So I think that, unfortunately, it's like, if you haven't done the work in the lead up, there's not going to be a lot you can do in the moment. You really need to prepare for these issues before they hit, and not even like necessarily knowing the specific issue, but laying that groundwork, that foundation of understanding with your dominant coalition.
So I guess the last question I would have, I'm just going to take it back to everything PR, the road always leads back to trust. So, you know, when to that point, that what you just said there, and that work that you do before the issue, can you just talk a little bit about the foundations of trust that maybe get built ahead of when you're having to think about these specific issues and how that plays in?
Mm-hmm. So I think there's two main themes of trust that would come to mind. There's your trust internally with your internal like dominant coalition and the people you need to convince, and then your external trust, right, with your customers, your investors, those sort of people, right? So I think starting with the internal side of it, you need to have, as a public relations professional, no, maybe you're not part of the dominant coalition, maybe you don't report directly to the CEO, but you have to have that trust in that moment in order to persuade them to look at both gaps. Because I think depending on your organization, it could be really easy to really just focus on the conformity gap, right? Like, I think that's what we saw a lot in 2020. It's like, people are calling for us to say this. Everyone wants us to say this. And so there was this push to put out a statement, but you're not thinking about the factual gap, right? You're like, okay, but do we actually do this? Does this actually align with us? Are we going to back this up with action? So the trust is required because you may have to sit and like get mudslung your way a little bit based on the decision. But in order to do something that in the long term is actually a better decision, not just for your company, but maybe for the movement, like they're going to have to trust you because it's going to be very uncomfortable. So there's that piece. And then the external trust as well, that really the organizations who actually can do CSA well and can benefit from it are the ones who actually have the credibility to do it, right? And so I think it's a very crowded space now. A lot of people, like, we saw when Nike supported Colin Kaepernick, its stock reached an all-time high. So then a lot of other organizations were like, "Ooh, that's a great marketing initiative. Let's do that too." But so it's become a very crowded market, but people don't trust that you're being authentic if you don't actually have the credibility to stand in that and make those types of statements. So I absolutely, Jacquie, think that trust is foundational to doing CSA right. And if you don't have a strong foundation of trust, like you're not well set up to do this well.
So my last question, and you can make it short because I've probably gone a little bit over the time that I might have had, but I did want to just talk. So I talked about that intellectual and emotional. And one of the things I loved about your paper is you also talked about, what happens to the people maybe who are you make a decision as a company, you've got people internally, externally, who are not, who are not on board with that and feel marginalized by that. And I think that you had some really great insights in terms of how those people are dealt with. Somebody talked about having a senior HR person reach out to those people and just listen to them. Tell me a little bit, like, just your kind of aha moments listening and going through the study, either one of these, either the people who are those sort of, disenfranchised and how you manage them, whether they're external or internal. And then the other piece that kind of, I was thinking about this because I was thinking about my own experience as a public relations person over many years when you are that kind of meat in the sandwich. I don't know if anything came out sort of in terms of the mental health of the teams themselves, the PR teams who do have to make these decisions. And sometimes there's, they might be popular with one stakeholder, but not others. Was there anything that came out that you wanted to share just on one of those themes?
Yeah. So first of all, I think that having a framework, going through the discussion, making consistent decisions, that is so important because the process doesn't end with making the decision and either putting out a statement and then following up with action or saying, "Oh, we're not going to make a statement." You have to then help manage those stakeholders who are going to disagree with your decision. And that's what I wrote about in the paper. What I was so impressed with one of my interviewees is, and I had this on my slide, but I didn't mention it. It's like, they try to respond to everybody. Like, they have an inbox for their employees to be like, "I don't like that you didn't say this," or "I like that you did." And they'll respond to them and they'll talk to them and they'll hear them out. And that's how they're managing that group that doesn't necessarily agree. And because they're making consistent decision-making, they have a rational, defensible reason why they made the decision, which makes it easier for them to then pick up the phone and call this person and say, "I hear you, but here's why we're not saying something," or "Here's why we are saying something." So that would be that piece. And then the second side is, the mental health toll on the PR professionals who are shouldering this is huge. It's part of why I wanted to do it. Some of the work I've done on CSA in the past, I clearly remember crying at my computer and thinking like, I do not have the skills to be the person to do this. Luckily, I had a lot of great support at Canadian Tire to help me through that. So what I would say is that, and that came up in my paper too, like I had someone say, I lost during 2020, they lost a lot of friends during that time making decisions. I had someone else say that one of the issues that they navigated was the worst issue they've ever experienced in their career. And this is someone who's worked in public relations for probably 25, 30 years, right? They're long into their career. And personally, it was really, really hard on people and being made to feel like they are the villain because they made a decision that people don't necessarily agree with. So that was a big part of the inspiration of why I wanted to do this in the first place, is to try and help take that burden off, while also being like, you can do this because it's an opportunity to prove your value. So don't shy away from it. Like, get in there, but also here are some tools to protect yourself.
Well, I can certainly relate to that. I think anybody who's been at a mid to senior level role in public relations has, done that on an annual basis, but there are sometimes those moments in your career that stay with you for a long time. So I think that's a really great outcome of your paper, as well as just bringing some light to that also. So thank you.
Thanks, Jacquie.
Thanks, Jacquie, Professor Hoornweg. I have a quick question. It's an interesting topic. I've thought about this a lot. I come from as you know, political communication background, and I've worked in tech communication as well. And I kind of trace this out, right? If you look at the data, people's behaviors changed massively after the year 2000, which is basically when the internet became a popular phenomenon. And then when broadband hit, and broad access to data via cell phones, people's behaviors changed a whole lot, right? And what came with that was like a lot more malleable attitudes, beliefs, and values, right? So whereas people had they used to have a really strong sense of self and a strong sense of worldview and whatnot pre 2006, afterwards they stopped having that. So I wonder if, and what happens now is you see that people cycle through trends really fast, right? So today's topic that seems so vital and so important, and everybody's posting about it, and everybody's getting very emotional and very, very wrapped up, either peters out very quickly, right, or can reverse, right, as we're now seeing with DEI, right? So I wonder what's the danger in this for organizations that are trying to have long organizational lifespans, right? So if you're Nike and you endorse Colin Kaepernick, that's okay because you're constantly running different campaigns, and that's one among many, right? But if you take a position on something more divisive, or if your marketing isn't as malleable and as kind of fast churning as Nike's is, isn't it a risk to like, how do you factor that risk of taking a position that might change, right? If your brand is a stable brand, right? You see what I'm saying, right?
Yeah, I absolutely think it's a risk. I think you're absolutely right. And I think that one of the problems is that a lot of organizations found themselves into, these are not my words, they're from the literature, but like a cycle of perpetual statement making, right? So it's like, you've made a statement on one thing, so then why not this? And why not this? And why not this, right? And then the economy starts to get bad and things get harder, and you have a lot of things to deal with as a company. And then there's all these expectations about making statements. So your first statement set a precedent, right? Mm-hmm. And then that causes problems for you down the road. If you didn't have, like, as you said, if you're like Nike, it was very clear why they were doing that, right? So I would be interested to know, but I would wager that stakeholders weren't then pressuring them to speak out on everything, right? Like Colin Kaepernick is an athlete, right? And they have a long history of supporting those types of issues. So that made sense. So that's why you really, really have to be like careful about what you're wading into, and does it actually make sense for your organization, so that you can like explain why you're doing it, not just to your dissenters, but in general, so that when the next issue comes up, you can say, like, you don't feel necessarily the pressure, or if there is that pressure, to have another statement. You can explain why, okay, this is why we weighed into this issue, but we're not weighing into that issue. Because you're absolutely right. And technology and I think social media, we know it drives polarization, right? We absolutely know that. There's no question about that. It also creates echo chambers for people. So it's creating a lot of issues, and that is like stemming into the real world, right? So that would be, again, another reason why to be so focused on doing something that is authentic and not getting bullied or pressured into weighing in on something just for that quick hit of like, okay, plus we did that, now it's gone, because it's going to come back around again in the form of another issue.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I think it's the only answer, right? Because it's a trend. But what worries me is people's attitudes changing, because they actually cycle almost in polarity. Like they'll go from, I'm very pro the socially progressive topic, to the same person cycles around to, I'm now against the socially progressive topic. And it happens fast. It happens in like 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah, but I would say, I think that's part of it, but I would also say that part of that's the say-do gap, right? There's like a trending issue. Yeah. So you say that you're pro something because you're protecting your personal reputation, right? And so then when the winds of change happen, you're like, oh no, my reputation. So then you're like, better align myself with this now. So I think there's like a level of authenticity that people can think about as well, right? Like it's not just about brands. It's also, what do we actually stand for? And like, if you're standing for this over here and then also this, and those two things, like actually when you boil them down, don't make sense with each other, you probably need to look in the mirror and think about what your personal values are.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. It's a wise approach. We have like 2 minutes because you gave such thorough answers, such excellent answers, that we only have a couple minutes. So I will go to I'll ask Professors Flynn and Hoornweg, any more questions?
No, we don't have enough time.
Okay, and I'll quickly ask the gallery, a quick question from the gallery?
Oh, Kevin has his hand up. No, joking. Oh, that was such a... Did you see
Anne,
Julia's face?
Where's my softball, Anne?
Okay. All right. All that being said, I'll ask the owner of this room, Dr. Terry Flynn, to put non-examining committee people into a room together. Don't leave, because we'll be back in just a few short minutes with our conclusion.